Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and today on the podcast, a movie about a movie reviewer who covers movies, and we're going to cover the movie about him. We're eating our own ass today, boys!
Wow, okay. You're fired up about today's film, and that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. We are here in the awesome movie year of 2014 to talk about our documentary selection, which is Life Itself, from director Steve James, about the life of Roger Ebert, famous film critic. And really, Jason maybe would not consider himself a film critic, but we are certainly a film criticism podcast here. And we have talked about Roger Ebert many, many times. Basically, any year between 1967 and 2013, when we're looking at reviews of films that we talk about, we have Ebert's reviews to quote from. And so it seemed entirely appropriate to include the film about his life.
We had to. We had to inception ourselves, or else what would the point be?
Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, a successful and acclaimed film. I mean, Ebert himself is probably the best known and most influential film critic of all time. I mean, as they go through a bit in this movie, you could mention someone like Pauline Kael or Andrew Sarris, but I think the difference is, as the movie shows, that because of the Siskel and Ebert TV show, in addition to his writing, Ebert reached such a wide audience of people who might not have read movie reviews in quote unquote highbrow publications like the New Yorker or the Village Voice.
It is so wild to think back of like, oh, it's Friday, the newspaper's coming out and we get to see the reviews if the reviewers like the movie. Now, how irrelevant is that? Your career, Josh.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. My career is irrelevant. But I remember doing that. I mean, not only watching Siskel and Ebert, and more Ebert and Roper, I think, as I got old enough to like really pay attention to that stuff. It was after Gene Siskel had died. But I did watch Siskel and Ebert too, and certainly picking up the newspaper, the neon section in the Review Journal here in Las Vegas, and seeing what Carol Kling had said about the movie that came out in that particular week. Definitely that was something that I did.
It was a big thing. It helped us choose what movies to watch that weekend. And for those awesome movie year diehards who are wondering, Ebert's evil twin Biebert, not in this movie.
Is that a thing that you just made up?
I think I've said Biebert a few times on here before. Okay. So,
what about Qbert? How does Qbert fit in?
Oh, that's a Dave question for sure.
Qbert.
Yeah, maybe Qbert could do a review on like Tron or Tetris, the movie, or something like that.
Makes sense. I'm sure we'll get it's sad that Ebert isn't around to review the eventual Qbert movie because real synergy going on there. Anyway, this film premiered at the 2014 Sundance Film Festival. And interestingly, at least to me, this is the second film already this season that we've covered that was released direct to VOD, as well as Riley Stern's Faults. Like that film, it was released at the same time in a small number of theaters. But I think, Jason, I'm trying to remember, I know you and I watched this together. I think we watched it at your house. And I want to say that it didn't play in theaters here in Vegas and that we watched it that way because that was the only way for us to see it.
Yeah. Was this the beginning of that, Josh? Is that what you're trying to get at? So,
I think it might have been. When I saw that about Faults, I was surprised that this was happening in 2014, but I guess this was really the beginning of that.
This is like an epiphany moment for me because you guys know how much I bitch about this stuff when movies don't go to theaters, and I'm totally remembering how mad I was about not being able to see this in theaters.
Tell us more, Dave. What did you do?
Did
you break glass? Did you scream and shout? What did you do, Dave?
I watched the movie at home, but I was very upset about that, though.
Did you write an angry letter?
I should have. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I think that is true, Dave, is that like, I guess I was thinking of that as a more recent thing that certainly accelerated in 2020 with the COVID pandemic, but was definitely going on at this time. And this was distributed by Magnolia Pictures, which, if I remember correctly, was sort of a pioneer of that model that did it earlier than a lot of other distributors, but Faults was from a different company. So this was happening across the board.
Magnolia got out Magnolia by A24 and Neon at this point. We never hear about Magnolia anymore.
No, I literally just reviewed one of their new movies yesterday, but
what was it called?
40 Acres.
Yeah,
they're definitely not as high profile, though. You're right, as they were perhaps at this time. And one can imagine that if this movie was made now, it would be like A24 or Neon that might distribute it.
Yeah, Josh, talk about how every critic was like, it's the greatest because it's about us.
It was very, very well reviewed. I was going to first... It did make it into enough theaters that it grossed $810,000 on a budget that I'm not sure about. But, again, it was interesting to me. We think of Ebert as this huge figure. Steve James, the director, is a pretty major documentary filmmaker, known still for Hoop Dreams, his most famous film. But this is a movie that had to go to Indiegogo to raise enough money for post-production. They raised $153,000 for post-production. So that was the cost for that phase. I'm not sure what the budget had been prior to that, but this wasn't a movie that was easily or well financed.
I'm glad that that crowdfunding has given opportunities to things like that, but it's somewhat shameful that studios won't pick up the bill on $153,000 to finish the movie about the movie critic who helped all of them along, for years and years.
Right, exactly. This movie was also nominated for 2 Emmys because it aired on CNN. It was eventually branded a CNN original film, and it won for Outstanding Editing for long-form documentary. It was shortlisted for the Best Documentary Feature Oscar, but ultimately not nominated. And this is one of these things that I think now rules have changed so that they don't want those things to overlap. And you have to choose whether to be a TV documentary and eligible for Emmys or a theatrical documentary and eligible for Oscars. But there was a lot of overlap for a long period of time.
I mean, as you know, Josh, I call bullshit on all this nonsense. It's where I can see it maybe around this time, but the idea of movies just being theatrical or whatever, that's over, man. We got to move on.
Right. But I do understand the idea that like these awards shows want to separate. And it's not even as much about like whether the movie did or did not play in some number of theaters, but what sort of category it wants to be in and whether it's primarily a quote TV premiere or a cinema experience, I guess.
I mean, I'm looking right now at the best documentary feature. It was a good year for documentaries. Citizen 4, which was the Edward Snowden documentary by Laura Poitras, won. That was okay. Finding Vivian Mayer, amazing documentary. That's in there. And Virunga, which I really liked about the gorilla sanctuary in Africa. That's on there. I haven't seen Last Days in Vietnam or The Salt of the Earth, but those are 3 really strong picks right there.
Yeah. And I think, as you alluded to, this was a very well-reviewed movie, in part because critics love Roger Ebert and were very enthused to see a movie about him. And I think it's a good movie. I think we'll agree that it's a good movie, but is it necessarily like a great documentary, a great piece of cinema, or as good as those other films, most of which I personally haven't seen? Maybe not. Yeah.
In my Letterboxd review at Go for Jason, I said pretty much what you're saying, that they did this really well, but it's a mix of like, here's my entire history and now all the travails I'm going through. And sometimes there's only certain levels you can get to with something like that, but I think they did hit all those levels on this one.
Right. And it's interesting that it was produced. I mean, Steve James started shooting this just a few months, although of course he wouldn't have realized this, but just a few months before Ebert died. And so it ended up being this chronicle of like his last days and all of his health problems and being in and out of the hospital and stuff. And, it just happened to be that moment. If this movie had been made a year later, it would have been just the retrospective and certainly would have included, I think, stuff about his health problems, but not had so much of that direct documentation. And if it had been made a bit earlier when he was in better shape, it might have just been a celebration of his continued relevance.
Yeah. Do you think that they would have done it earlier, or was the impetus knowing that Ebert was kind of nearing the end of his life, and Ebert was very demanding that they show all those like the suctioning through his throat because he had lost his bottom jaw at this point in time and everything like that. So I wonder if it was like maybe they talked about it and then they got to the point where it's like, we got to do it now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's possible. I don't know if that's the reason. I mean, he had been sick and had all these difficulties for a while now. I think he stepped back from being on TV back in 2006 when he was no longer able to speak. So this had been going on for a while and they could have done it. I mean, certainly he had been well past the point of being this, important figure and this towering, titan of film criticism and whatever for a while now, and would have certainly been a warranted subject before this. But and Steve James even says in this movie that he didn't realize exactly how close Ebert was to the end when he started making it.
I thought one of the most my favorite things and the most uplifting things at one point, Ebert says, "Do I miss eating, drinking, talking?" And he says, "Not really. I have my work, and that's really what's most satisfying to me at this point." And obviously his family too. So that was what a positive attitude to take with such a tough situation.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that is one thing that this movie showcases is the way that he was able to face these severe difficulties with that attitude and use it in a way to transform his approach to his own work and how his writing like flourished while he wasn't able to speak. And he did have that support of his family. So as tough as some of that stuff is to watch, and it's definitely tough to watch, it is kind of inspiring in its own way.
Yeah, and Josh, now all me and you need to do is find someone to love us.
Well, we'll keep working on that, I suppose. That's outside the scope of this podcast.
Maybe outside the scope of everything we can accomplish. So.
Maybe so. So again, as you said, critics very much loved this film, and it's fair, I think, to acknowledge that it being about a critic who virtually every other critic looks up to is part of that. It had a 98% rating at Rotten Tomatoes, almost universally positive. And a mix of, I tried to get here a mix of people who knew him or didn't know him. So Anne Hornaday in the Washington Post, who at one point in her review mentions that she only ever met Ebert once in passing and barely spoke to him. So not someone who was personally connected per se. She said, "It would have been easy, and in Steve James's case, tempting, to make Ebert into a secular saint in this documentary, much of which was filmed during the last months of the film critic's life. But as this absorbing, delightfully entertaining portrait demonstrates, Ebert wasn't always an angel. That headstrong commitment and ringingly persuasive voice course through life itself, which not only pays homage to Ebert as a champion of emerging filmmakers from Scorsese and Errol Morris to James himself, but as a fighter to the end. James gives Ebert his due, not only as the first movie reviewer to win the Pulitzer Prize, but as a towering cultural figure and, finally, an unpretentious, ink-stained philosopher."
Yeah, that review feels a little too easy for me because it's almost underestimating both Steve James as a documentarian and Ebert as a film lover, like to make him into a saint. Like, how many times, Josh, have you brought up an Ebert review where he's talking about, how pervy he was on the ladies back in the day. Like,
yes,
there was no way Ebert was going to be like, make me look like a saint. And also, it's not like this was hidden. We know, like, he was, a little lecherous, maybe charming in that way, but he loved the ladies and all that stuff. And Steve James, I mean, it just seems like she has a lack of understanding of him as a documentarian. Like, he's never tried to make everything all shiny and nice. Like, get out of here with that.
No, I mean, I think, and I don't think she's accusing him of doing that. I think she's saying that maybe it's tempting for him as someone who is Ebert's friend to do that. And he doesn't do it. And she does cite multiple examples. I mean, I didn't want to just recite, exposition from the film or whatever, but of things that you're talking about. It shows how Ebert was arrogant and perhaps condescending to people in his early career. It talks about his alcoholism, his heavy drinking in his younger days, and his womanizing and that kind of stuff. So it is all in the movie, and he doesn't come across as a saint, or at least from his early time.
Right. But I would think that would be part of the pitch. Like, you think hey, yeah, sure, him with the sweaters vest on and, a thumbs up, but like this guy was
Where's
a real.
that thumb been?
There you go. So thumbs up where is what we're asking. So, but no, I mean, that's part of the charm of Ebert. Like that. And I thought probably some of the best stuff in this movie, like I was a Chicago newsman and, I was at the bar every night holding court. And, when my fellas went home, there was always a hooker there to pick me back up or whatever. Right. It was like, but, we did Citizen Kane last year and this whole idea of like the print newsman and how important that was. Like that's not around anymore. So that to me is part of the charm of this, seeing like that in its heyday with him.
Right, exactly. And he, I mean, obviously cared deeply about movies and was an important film critic, but also as a journalist and as a newspaper man, that was just as important to him as sort of part of his identity, it seems like.
I think so. I mean, I think go over all the stuff in college and he was editing the paper and how they said at like 22, the student newspaper at University of Illinois was, better than most national newspapers at the time. And he didn't come out to be a film critic, right? He was working at the paper at Chicago Tribune, right? Or
Sun-Times.
Sun-Times. Yeah, Siskel was Tribune. Chicago Sun-Times, and then they were like, "You're the movie critic now." So he dove in like headstrong with that. So.
Right, exactly. I mean, he had been a reporter, and he mentions his ambition had been initially to be like a philosophy professor. So he did sort of stumble into film criticism, which I feel like is a not uncommon thing, especially in this era when that would happen. I mean, Gene Siskel, I think, was like a real estate reporter or something when he became the film critic at the Chicago Tribune. So that happened not infrequently.
Yeah, I mean, like, on a much more local level, right? When I started writing, I was writing about movies for a minute, and then it was music, which they like kind of moved me to on a whim, and then it became food, which I kind of asked for. So there's all different paths. Not all of us go right to it like you, buddy.
Right. Yes, I did want to get there, and as you said, I'm still working on it.
You're the most successful film critic in America, right?
So sadly, my level of success is not that far below that, yeah. Which is a statement on the sort of state of the profession. So Kenneth Turan in the Los Angeles Times, who did know Ebert, said, "Critics review films. Sometimes they even appear in films, but films are not made about them. Roger Ebert, however, did things his own way, and Life Itself, a fine and moving new documentary that tells his story, shows us how and why he stood out. Ebert was a colleague and friend for 2 decades before his death last year, and I always marveled at how deftly he handled the personal aspects of his job, how much he enjoyed reaching and touching people. Life Itself may sound like it's a film that would only be of interest to those who knew Ebert personally or to fellow film critics, but the opposite is true. Because of Ebert's remarkable ability to connect with individuals and enlarge their lives with his passion for film, it wasn't just a few people who knew him that well. It was everyone."
Right. I mean, that's fair, right? They talk about how many times he and Siskel were on The Tonight Show. And like you said, Josh, you watched them every weekend, and they definitely felt like they could be on Hollywood squares whenever they wanted to be, right? They were perennial TV fixtures of our childhood.
Yeah, they were. And I think even if you didn't know or care about movie criticism, you would be familiar with these guys are the movie critic guys, and they do 2 thumbs up and that kind of stuff. They would show up in cartoon form on, The Critic, or were they on The Simpsons too?
Yeah,
maybe.
So.
Well, they're definitely on The Critic.
Right, of course they were on The Critic, yes. And but and filmmakers would take jabs at them. Didn't Roland Emmerich in his Godzilla movie turn them into characters who got smashed by Godzilla or something like that? I mean, they were everywhere.
That's fun. I mean, in the movie they show the clip of The Tonight Show where Chevy Chase is sitting right next to them, and they bash Three Amigos, which historically they're wrong about. People love the Three Amigos, Josh.
They do.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in a long time, but I admired that like boldness that Ebert has there sitting next to Chevy Chase, who not only is very famous, but is also very famously a jerk and just totally bashing the film right there. And they talk about how he had, friendships with famous people, with filmmakers. Scorsese is in this film talking about how much Ebert's support meant to him early in his career. And then they show the Siskel and Ebert review of The Color of Money, where they just trash it, and I feel like that's a level of fortitude that I personally don't know that I can muster, and good for Ebert.
I mean, in a way you did, Josh. We could bring up Heckler and all you did with Jamie Kennedy there in that film. I recommend the audience go watch Josh's scene a few times in a row to really get the nuances of it. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. Like when I'm writing about food, I get along with most of the chefs, and I'm trying not. A part of it is you don't want to trash like small businesses and stuff like that. So I get it. The Scorsese thing was also cool because he was saying like, hey, they kind of helped resurrect me in the 80s. So I took that to notice when they said, yeah, this wasn't very good. At the same time, Paul Newman won an Oscar for that. Again, historically, Color of Money, they're wrong.
Yeah, I love The Color of Money. That's actually one of my favorite Scorsese films. But, one of the great things about criticism is being able to have different opinions, as Siskel and Ebert proved. And I think there's two things there. I mean, when he's doing that in front of Chevy Chase, like Chevy Chase obviously is not his friend. That's just sort of the boldness to speak directly to a famous person like that. But the Scorsese thing where they are friends and he's been a supporter and they have a personal relationship, to then detach yourself. If I was trying to review a movie that you made, for example, and didn't think it was good, I think that would be really hard for me.
I had that once. I was reviewing theater because I'm well-rounded. And a friend of mine put on a play that I just thought was a total miss. And I wrote the article, honestly, but I called her ahead of time to let her know that, like, hey, I just thought this missed. I know you're talented. This one just didn't get there. I'm always looking forward to seeing what you do next. And since then, I think I had her in a movie and we're still friends. So,
well, that's good. But I do think that's a difficult thing. And to sort of separate those, not only for the critic to do, but for Scorsese, who seems very magnanimous about it now, who knows how he felt at the time. But, for other artists to feel that way, I think is a difficult thing.
Well, Josh did just watch my new movie, Dave. Should we have him review it right now?
Oh, yeah.
I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't write like an official review of it. I gave you my personal feedback, but I would not write an article about it.
That's going on the poster.
Don't think that it's, it's a conflict of interest. So
what are you talking about? What country are we living in right now? Conflict of interest.
Well, you got to try to maintain better standards than the people who run our country.
Yeah.
Speaking of conflict of interest, I figured it was only right to get the review from RogerEbert.com, which is a continuing thriving site for film criticism. Matt Zoller Seitz, who at the time was the editor-in-chief of RogerEbert.com, said, "Nothing I have to say here is detached, much less objective. I love this movie. Everyone associated with this site seems to have enjoyed it, not just because it's an essentially warm and loving work, but because it has enough respect for Roger to refuse to turn him into a plaster saint. It's about as emotional as a biography of a well-liked man can be without turning gooey. It is an accessible, conventional nonfiction film, and yet at the same time it is wily and inventive, dodging and weaving to make easy labeling impossible, inspiring and engaging you, bending and breaking rules, inventing and reinventing itself as it goes along, much like Roger did."
Do you think that, Josh? Do you think it's reinventing the form? I thought it was a pretty straightforward, good documentary, but there was nothing where it was like, game changing in that regard.
Right. No, I agree. It is very straightforward. I think it's well made as a straightforward documentary. And I think that's what Steve James does. As I said in my Letterboxd, Steve James is not Werner Herzog, who does show up here briefly as an interviewee, who takes this very artistic, poetic approach. Steve James is more of a journalist type documentarian. And that's great for most of the stuff he does, which is generally much more like social issue oriented than this film is. So I don't think it's a knock to say it's straightforward, but I agree that it's not reinventing anything.
Yeah, I don't think it's a knock either. I just want these reviewers to be a little more accurate in their depiction of this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, he's reviewing a movie about that depicts the decline and death of his friend. So that's got to be hard for him to write at all, I would think.
Do you still go to RogerEbert.com, Josh, to read reviews?
Yeah, I check it out. They do. I mean, Matt Zoller Seitz there. He's not the editor-in-chief anymore. I think Brian Tallarico is now the editor there, but he still writes there, and Brian's stuff is good too. And A lot of really good critics, including some who have long associations with Ebert, like Christy Lemire, who was the co-host of the brief, like Ebert produced new version.
That was no good.
It wasn't great, but she's good and she still writes there, and a bunch of other good critics. So yeah, it's still a thriving website, which I think is fantastic. Chaz Ebert, like I believe probably just finances the whole thing, and good for her.
Yeah, I like it too. And I like that they showed how forward thinking Ebert was in like moving his work onto the internet as it was becoming the place to move it to.
Yeah, I mean, he was big on Twitter before Twitter was not a place that you wanted to be anymore, and all of that. And I would imagine that if he had lived, he would have been on, Blue Sky and Letterboxd and whatever else was the new thing as time went forward, I think.
I'm on Letterboxd. I'd go for Jason.
You sure are. So, as I said, Jason, I think we watched this movie together at your house, and it was a lovely experience. And Dave, you also watched that at home?
Yep, watched it at home. Enjoyed it back then, and still enjoy it.
Did you have a history of watching Ebert at all?
Absolutely.
Or reading him?
Yeah, like you said, mostly with Roper at the, during that era. But I remember like looking back at old stuff too on YouTube, and yeah, I mean, he's just always been around. If you're somebody who, loves movies, he's somebody you look to.
Right. Yeah. And then one of the other great things about RogerEbert.com, in addition to all the new stuff it publishes, is that however Ebert managed to get the rights to all of his old newspaper reviews, even though they were written for the Sun-Times, like it's a full repository of literally every review he's ever written, which is like no other critic has something that comprehensive. And that's amazing.
I love that. Josh and I wrote for the Las Vegas Weekly for years, and those scumbags over there just took down all the archives because it saves them like $10 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't even see our old articles. Shame on you, you filthy bitches at the Weekly.
Yeah, there's still some, it's very inconsistent what's there. But I mean, I have written for so many outlets over the years that just have been deleted. So I try to save as much as I can. I'm not as diligent as I could be.
Is that because of you?
In all cases, definitely.
You're consistent, and I like that about you.
So anything else you want to say about the background of this film, Jason?
Steve James quote, "That's what made me want to do the movie, the way in which his life had this extraordinary desire for adventure. And then, of course, he did his share of suffering and soldiering on. And all of that informed the kind of critic he became. It informed his reviews. It informed everything about who he was and what we came to collectively love about him."
So true. So we'll come back and get into more of our general thoughts on life itself. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2014, we are talking about Steve James's documentary Life Itself, about Roger Ebert. And I mean, we've talked a lot about what it does thus far. I think we agree that this is a pretty straightforward film, but it presents everything, I think, in a fairly clear manner.
And entertaining. Josh, do you agree that probably the most entertaining stuff in there is that, Chicago newspaper man segment where he's just, after this scuzzy bar shut down, we'd go to this scuzzy bar and just, obviously we're glad that he got off the sauce, so to speak. But that was real, like, fun look at a time gone by.
Yeah, that stuff is a lot of fun. And I mean, I think it's also really fun to see when we get into the Siskel and Ebert era and they show some of the outtakes of them sniping at each other. And you could go to YouTube and see tons of that stuff. And it's very amusing to watch. And I mean, the other thing that I always see, I mentioned the era of when we're quoting Roger Ebert's written reviews. But of course, there's also a very large era when I will go take a look and see if I can find the Siskel and Ebert segment about a movie that we're talking about. So I've seen a lot of that vintage stuff over the time of doing this podcast. And it's just always entertaining. It's always fun to see what kind of ridiculous little things they grab onto to disagree about. I mean, they're entertaining in a way that really no other film critics on TV ever were able to do.
I agree with you. That was just as good, as I always like to say, now, Gene, so, but it was fun because they would just rapid fire, just eviscerate each other, and like it's not like just the two of them there. There's a full crew watching these grown men just, rag on each other. And I enjoyed that too.
Yeah. I mean, as I think one of the producers says at one point, they're like little boys still, it is very immature the way they do it. I mean, on the actual show, they'll get into debates about the merits of the movie. But when you see those outtakes where they're just insulting each other and Gene calls Roger fat and Roger calls Gene an idiot or whatever, I mean, these are not exactly a nuanced criticism.
Right. It's like, Gene, how about doing it with a little more enthusiasm? Roger, how about doing it with a little less enthusiasm? It's like, all right, guys, like, relax.
Yeah. I get to do this every week with you guys. So, I got the best seat in the house. So.
Hey, what you hear from us is what you get. I don't think we're pulling any punches on this.
No, I'd like to think we have slightly, more regard for each other because, I mean, the difference, not to take this too seriously, but, Siskel and Ebert were rivals that were put together by a TV producer because they thought it would make for a good TV show. And then eventually over time, they became friends and they were business partners because they owned the show themselves. We started this podcast because we were already friends. And so, that's a good foundation to build on.
And as you know, the real prize were the friends we made along the way.
But we already made friends. So we did not, guess we made friends with Dave along the way.
There's no prize there. Josh.
No prize at all. That's the lesson.
Suckers.
Of Awesome Movie Year. I feel like we have to talk about, though, also all the scenes of Ebert in the hospital, which are tough to watch.
Yeah, he had his lower jaw removed. I had a cousin who, I don't know if it was the same condition, but didn't have a lower jaw. And they had, in this film, you saw a lot of them suctioning, just making sure his body was clean from bacteria, I guess, and everything else. And they are hard to watch and uncomfortable. And like we said, the uplifting thing about that is Ebert seemed to always be in good spirits when that was.
Yeah, and he never loses his enthusiasm for watching movies. You see him, Chaz at one point says how they escaped from the hospital one time to take him to a movie, but for the most part, he isn't able to go to theaters anymore, but he's still watching things on his laptop. At one point, he's talking about 56 Up, the Michael Apted documentaries, holding up the DVD that he's been watching. And he's still writing reviews and writing columns. And I think that's fantastic, even amid all of that misery, to be able to have that level of enthusiasm and do some of his best work at the time when he was undergoing all of those procedures.
I agree. And that's what I said I found very uplifting about it. I liked seeing Ebert, the adoptive grandfather, right? The one white dude with Chaz and, a fully black family. That was nice to see how ingratiated and, just how loved he was and how much he loved his family. And that was good stuff too.
Yeah, that's great. And you never know too. I mean, with step parents, like whether they get fully embraced by the kids and the grandkids. And it seemed like that Chaz's kids were probably adults by the time she and Ebert got married. And yet they obviously he's just so lovable that they all embraced him. And you can see the grandkids kind of tearing up as they talk about, watching movies with him when they were younger. And you got these family vacation videos of him taking a walk with his grandson and all this stuff. So that is really lovely. And it feels very genuine.
I think so. Josh, what is the future of film criticism?
Oh, well, I don't know. Maybe that's more the legacy of this film rather than the present. I mean, that's one thing that they don't really talk about that much. There's one point where Steve James says, he's been emailing Ebert these interview questions. And when Ebert is really fading, not long before he dies, and Steve James is sending him these questions where it's like, he says he's trying to get him to engage with some topic. And one of them is on the future of film criticism, but Ebert never really addresses that question. And I mean, you could say that he addressed it by creating that website and by not only making it his own website, but by recruiting all those other writers to work for it, to write for it. And one of the things he was really big on, I don't know if they call it this anymore because it seems a little condescending, but what he used to call far-flung correspondence, recruiting critics from other countries, from other backgrounds, to contribute so that they kind of balanced out his Midwestern white guy perspective. And he was always very much for that.
Yeah, I don't think that's condescending. I mean, they're far from Chicago.
True.
That's far flung.
Yeah.
So, I did enjoy the stuff where they're talking about how his style, as you said, very Midwestern, straightforward, But maybe one of the things to learn in there is like, hey, film critic Ebert also wrote 50 other books about other things, right?
Right, he
Movie
did.
books and books about walks in London and all types of stuff, right?
Yeah, he wrote these travel books. He wrote a novel, which I hadn't remembered that he did. And I don't know if that's any good, but, and he was multidisciplinary. They show his book about being at the Cannes Film Festival. He also illustrated himself. I mean, the guy was obviously extremely talented.
Yeah, it makes us feel like pieces of shit.
Right. I mean, he's a unique, one of a kind talent. But I mean, I think you're right that it is impressive and important that he wrote these other things. But what is inspiring to me is that even if you don't know about those other things and you just would read movie reviews, like that stuff stands the test of time. And you can read an Ebert review of some movie that nobody cares about anymore. And it's really interesting to read just on its own. And that's inspiring as a critic.
Actually, the book I'm reading right now is Rogues by Patrick Radden Keefe, who's like my favorite author. He wrote Say Nothing and Empire of Pain. This is just a collection of like I guess he curated of different long form articles he wrote over this century. And it's really interesting. So I can understand why you would be so into that, Josh. The one piece of research I didn't get to do that I would have liked to would be watch Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which he wrote for Russ Meyer. And I have never seen it, Josh.
I have seen it, and it is, they describe it in here. I don't remember if it's Ebert or someone else who talks about how Russ Meyer decided that it was going to be like 50 different things. It's an exploitation movie, it's an action movie, it's a social issue drama, it's a musical, it's this. And you can tell when you watch the movie that it's like way too many things at once. And it's fun. It's super campy. It has a lot of, memorable lines. And if you want to credit Ebert with maybe the self-awareness to know that the reason people are going to watch this movie is because it's ridiculous and he writes these ridiculous lines. I mean, the one you see clips of most often is the guy saying like, it's my happening and it freaks me out or something along those lines. And so, yeah, it's bad, but it's bad in a fun way.
But there's lots of titties, and Ebert loved them titties, boy. Woo!
He did. And I feel like we've talked about this, as you mentioned, like a lot of the times we look at his old reviews and he's talking about his sexploits, and he was unabashed in a way that I feel like you probably would not want to do now.
Oh yeah, he'd get canceled now.
In his love for large breasts. And it's endearing. I feel like it's never condescending. It doesn't sound misogynist or anything like that. He just really, really loves and also probably respects women with large breasts.
Who has a condescending love for large breasts, Josh? These are all positive loves in my regard.
Yeah, I mean condescending toward women, to be objectifying or whatever. But yeah, I mean, Chaz doesn't mention it, but one has to wonder.
No, he says when they first met at that AA meeting over the coffee table, and he looked at her and he was like, "Damn, girl, where you get all them titties at?" That was when she fell for him.
I think I missed that part of the movie.
Oh, maybe I missed that part.
But you can see Chaz is not a small woman. Let's put it that way. And maybe Ebert, he had a type, and good for him.
You like the big mamas, Josh. You like the thick ones. We like women of all types on this show.
Yeah, Oprah. They show him appearing on the Oprah. Siskel and Ebert appearing on her talk show. They don't mention that he also dated Oprah at one time.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Now it all makes sense because he does kind of look like a lesbian.
All right, we'll leave that one. One omission, though, that we have not omitted here, but the movie surprisingly omits, literally zero mention of Richard Roeper in this movie.
Why is that, Josh?
I don't know. And I mean, I was wondering, like, I am not aware of any sort of bad blood or feud. I mean, they worked together for a long time and they didn't have the chemistry that he and Siskel had necessarily, but that was in part because Roeper was chosen by Ebert as opposed to them being put together. They got along well, as far as I know. And Roeper kept the show going after Ebert was no longer able to appear on TV because he couldn't speak. And the show ended not because Roeper wanted it to, but because the syndicator, Disney, who owned the show, Buena Vista Television, decided to replace it with the short-lived version featuring Ben Lyons and Ben Mankiewicz, and, thought that it wasn't relevant anymore. And I don't know. And just recently, within the last few months, because Roper finally left the Chicago Sun-Times, which is sadly in severe decline, where he'd been a columnist for decades. And Chaz Ebert made a big announcement, Richard Roper coming to RogerEbert.com with his column. So obviously everything is good there. So I really don't know.
Yeah, that's dumb.
It is. Because even like as great as Siskel is, Roper made a very significant contribution there, I think.
Well, we got to have them both. You can't have one and not the other, right? And a Roper, sadly, Siskel died at 52, right? Roper has a different perspective being with him after Siskel died and watching his friend Ebert die. And he's now, is he carrying on that legacy, or is that kind of set where it is? And now are they going down different paths? Like, yeah, I agree with you, Josh. That's a misstep.
Yeah, I mean, and they interview multiple producers from over time on the show. I don't know why they couldn't have just gotten Roper in there to give his thought on Ebert. And I've not seen any explanation as to why that was the case, but it did seem very odd to me.
On the bright side, as you mentioned, the Werner Herzog interview, exactly what you want it to be.
Oh, yeah. Always good. And it's great to hear. We hear from him. We hear from Scorsese. Ramin Barani is another filmmaker, Gregory Nava, all of these filmmakers, Ava DuVernay, all of these filmmakers whose early works Ebert championed, and he helped them sort of get off the ground.
Yeah, it might have been nice to have a few more female filmmakers, or, really dig into the indie movements, the New York indie scene in the 80s, like how did he have an effect on that? Obviously, he's from Chicago, but, what was his effect on Spike Lee or Charles Burnett, who was a contemporary, just showing some other things, right? Like, do we have anything Ava DuVernay is the only kind of Black filmmaker that they kind of spotlight in that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we have, Ramin Barani and Gregory Nava, definitely filmmakers of color that he was a big champion for that.
I agree with you. I think maybe having dived deeper into certain movements might have been unique, and especially if he really loved one, or say the opposite, if he really hated one, that would have been interesting.
Right. And that's one thing we also don't get into. I mean, there are multiple books that are just collections of Ebert's negative reviews.
This movie stinks, right?
Right. Or I hated this movie, which I think is from his review of North, which was one of our earliest episodes. And we've definitely talked about some of those infamous Ebert negative reviews on the show. And I believe, do they mention his negative review of Blue Velvet, which is another very famous one?
Yes.
But, mentioning that in the context of a movie like Blue Velvet, which is now an acknowledged classic, but we don't get anything about North or any of those other movies that were very, very Cop and a Half was a famous disagreement with Siskel and Ebert. And that's some of the most fun stuff on the show.
I mean, there's such a great clip. I might have mentioned this to you. Either they were doing a roast or like a tribute to Rob Reiner on Comedy Central, and Michael McKean was interviewing him. And he's like, I'd like to read you Ebert's review of North, right? And he reads this piece where he's just trashing him. And Rob Reiner has a perfect response. He goes, well, if you read in between the lines, it's not that bad. It's like, what a perfect answer.
Right. So, yeah. Rob Reiner not interviewed in this documentary. And so you wonder about that.
Awesome movie, your Hall of Famer.
Yes. He is indeed. So, but I mean, I think this goes back to what I was saying, where because of the moment that they decided to make this movie, so much of it is taken up with the health issues, which are important. And clearly it was important to Ebert to show. But if they had made this at a slightly different time, would that have been more of just a little moment to mention what happened at the end of his life, and more time devoted to his work, to the Siskel and Ebert show, maybe even Roper? I don't know.
Have you guys ever seen the amazing Lee Von Helm documentary, Ain't In It for My Health?
No.
I love that. It's one of my favorite music documentaries. I bring it up because it's similar in that it's towards the end of Lee Von Helm's life and he's still working. And unlike Roper, maybe Lee Von still had to work. And it goes over his history with the band, but also what he's doing now. And I think that is a really good model of kind of showing some more all-encompassing things that, at least from my perspective, didn't get left out, as far as like the things that you're talking about were left out here.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not knocking what they ended up doing. And I think if they included all of the things that we just mentioned that were not there, the movie would have been too long, or
that shouldn't bother Steve James. He made
that's
Hoop
true.
Dreams.
He has, yeah, that's true. But I mean, I think other than Roper, like the things that we mentioned are more like, well, they could have done this or they could have done this. To me, Roper is like, I don't understand. It's inexcusable that he's not in this.
But I agree with you, but I do think a little more focus on some of those negatives in that regard, other than like, hey, Martin Scorsese, Roger Ebert loved me, but he didn't like The Color of Money would have been good as well.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I know, Dave, you mentioned on Letterboxd that, you had trouble watching some of those hospital scenes.
Yeah, they're just so dark and just depressing and just tough to watch. But like, again, this is the movie that it seems like it's the story he wanted to put out into the world. So, I mean, obviously, even if I, didn't love those moments and it's kind of hard to like enjoy watching them, I don't think a different version of the movie would have made sense if this is what he wanted to put out into the world. And even though, like you said, some of like the negative reviews maybe should have been featured, and Roper certainly a big omission. It was clear that a big part of the runtime was supposed to be about all this health stuff. So yeah, I think they did what they were setting out to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And they mention also that, when Siskel died, he kept his condition a secret. And Ebert didn't even know that he was sick, and neither did people outside his family. And Ebert had the opposite perspective, that he never wanted to hide any of these things. So it was clearly very important to him.
Yeah.
And definitely they did what they set out to do here.
Well, Siskel, that was a crazy thing. I mean, it seemed to me, it made it seem like he didn't even have his kids know about it, right? He just wanted them to have a good last year with him or something.
Right. His wife knew, and I think she said like her sisters or something like that knew. But yeah, I mean, hey, everyone has different personal perspectives on how to handle something like that. But clearly it shook Ebert and made him determined to do things in the opposite way.
And he was there, and like you said, out front, and there were no punches pulled. Like, we, not just via the documentary aspect, but like we all knew what was going on with him the whole time.
Right. And he would write about it on his website. And he was, I think they show he was on the cover of Esquire one time with a photo of his,
black,
his face exactly. Yeah, the turtleneck, exactly
turtleneck.
how it looked. And yeah, he was very, very front and center about all of that, certainly throughout. So should we rate this out of 5 thumbs up?
2 thumbs up.
That's confusing.
All right. Out of 5 thumbs, I gave it 3.5 thumbs. It's just a real... it's a good piece. I did not find it difficult to watch, but I understand where the aspects would be. I think our criticisms are fair. I also think there's just a cap to what this is able to do. So 3.5 is that cap.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I give it 3.5. I think the first time I saw it, I only gave it 3. And I was maybe hyped up too much by all of those reviews from other critics who were just...
Ebert fanboy!
Yeah, exactly. And I was a fan, but I think that was because I was such a fan. I was so excited, like so interested to see a movie about this guy who I very much admire. And I was a little let down maybe because it's so conventional. But this time I was just, it gives you so much. It really does. And those hospital scenes are hard to watch. They were for me at least, but also very emotionally affecting. So yeah, 3.5 thumbs from me. Dave, how would you rate this?
I'm going to go with 3 thumbs. And also, I just want to say, long before piecing it together, I was going to start a film criticism website with a couple of friends, and it was called That Critic Dude. We were going to rate movies out of thumbs. So that was going to be...
I think you would have gotten sued.
5 out of 5 thumbs. So yeah.
Yeah. I remember because the Ebert and Siskel now, their estates own the trademarks to 2 thumbs up. And I remember... I review movies on KTNV Channel 13 here in Las Vegas. And when I used to go in the studio to do those reviews and I was talk to the anchor, and one time, unbeknownst to me, I came in and I gave my whole spiel about what I thought about the movies. And the anchor was like, oh, so thumbs up or thumbs down. And I had to give that. And then after the segment ended, I had to tell them, like, we can't do that because this is owned by someone else. You got to get me to say something else because I can't give it thumbs up and thumbs down.
Take 2.
So, yeah, good thing that you didn't do that, Dave. You don't want to incur the wrath of Ebert.
That's right.
So we'll come back and talk about the legacy of life itself. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2014, we are talking about Steve James's documentary, Life Itself, about Roger Ebert. And we've mentioned some of the legacy. I mean, I think the RogerEbert.com website is a big part of that, and how his name remains synonymous with film criticism, even for people who maybe weren't familiar with him when he was alive.
I mean, especially now with the drudgery and the descent into irrelevance of most film critics. I'm not going to name anyone by name here. But yeah, I mean, that's why I said, what's the future of this? Is it just TikTok or throwing chicken nuggets at the Minecraft movie? I'm confused at where we go from this thing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the kind of film critic that Ebert was, where he was able to spend nearly 50 years working for a daily newspaper writing movie reviews, barely exists. I mean, there are probably, I don't know for sure, but I would guess there's maybe 10 to 12 people at this moment who are fully, like, full-time employed as film critics doing what Ebert did at places like the New York Times and the LA Times and the Boston Globe. Anything below that no longer has something like that. And most people, if they make a living as a film critic, are like me. They're freelancers. They work for various outlets. They get paid not very much money.
Scraps,
and yeah,
scraps.
It really is. And,
it's sad.
you know, like maybe they do it as a part-time thing while doing something else. And, you know, you have to really be dedicated to doing it because it doesn't pay and it doesn't get a whole lot of respect. And, you know, Ebert embraced the internet. And you know, most of what I write is on the internet. And so I'm not opposed to that in any way. But I think there was a level of assumption that, like, there was no professional standard anymore. Like, who cares? Why should I listen to, like, who's Ebert or who's anyone when I could just listen to this random person on Twitter and it's just as good?
It's a weird time. Like I said, it was very important as kids, you know, and for us, you think about the generations before us, like our grandparents and parents, especially my grandparents, every weekend would look at the New York Times, what's playing, what's this, what got a good review, what didn't. But Josh, you were on staff full time at one point, but would you say you were not a full time critic because you were doing other things as well? Is that it? Or?
Right, exactly. And that's what I'm saying is that people like Manohla Dargis at the New York Times, for example, she is a full-time film critic. That is what she's employed at the New York Times for. That is all that she does. Very, very few people are doing that. And even when I was employed full-time at Las Vegas Weekly, I did a lot of other things. I was a staff writer or I was an associate editor. And movie reviews were important to me. So I made sure that was part of my job, but it was far from the only part. And there were definitely times when I was employed full time that I got pushback from the higher ups, like, why are you spending so much time doing movie reviews? We need you to do other things. And I was very adamant. And so for me at the time, in a way, it was a relief to move into freelancing when I could choose to just do what I wanted. And that's still where I'm at. And I'm very lucky to be in that position, but I'm also very lucky to be in a position where not making a lot of money is okay with me.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite reviews that you've done?
Oh man, I remember one time, I can't remember exactly when it was, but some anniversary that, you know, Las Vegas Weekly's 10th or 15th anniversary or something like that. They did collate some like excerpts from my reviews of mostly just like scathing things that I had said, like the Ebert's, you know, review of North. And I think I just mentioned this. I don't know if it was just when we were talking about something related to Kevin Smith, my review of Jersey Girl, when I remember saying I couldn't have hated this movie anymore if Ben Affleck had come off the screen and punched me in the face. I think I remember that as a particularly
you probably would have liked it more.
Mean review. Yeah. But I mean, I don't, you know, I'd have to go back and look because I'd like to say that I'm more proud of reviews that were positive or where I felt like I had some insight about the movie and not just something snarky, but it's fun to say snarky things.
Yeah. And you're good at it.
Thank you. So Ebert also had a statue of him erected not long after this movie came out in July 2014 at the Virginia Theater in Champaign, Illinois, home of his alma mater, where they have Ebert Fest, the annual Roger Ebert Film Festival. So that statue is still there.
And tell him what it is. It's him motorboating a big stripper.
I think he's giving a thumbs up, but you know, where's the thumb going, as we say?
Who wouldn't give a thumbs up to that situation?
Yeah. So. Maybe they could just nearby, like build a statue of a large-breasted woman just to get it, you know, so that he has some company or something. I don't know. But I do remember when I want to say it was Charlie XCX or some pop singer trying to be, like denigrating the idea that maybe they got a bad review or something, saying, oh, they don't build statues of critics, and all these social media posts of people putting up a photo of the Ebert statue. I think he might be the only one, but it does exist.
That counts. Should we talk about Steve James, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, when we first started Awesome Movie Year, the first year was 94, and Hoop Dreams was what we were going to do as the documentary pick. That was such an important documentary in that verite following these two basketball players from Chicago, William Gates and Arthur Agee. And it's a 3-hour and plus movie, but it's great one and one of the most important documentaries of the last century, I would say. I liked Labicus, the Small Enough to Jail, which is about literally the only bank and banker who went to jail in the wake of the 2008 and 9 financial scandals. And of course, it's just like one little Chinese guy, not big banks or anything like that. He did a lot of good other sports movies, or some other sports movies. For 30 for 30, no crossover. The Trial of Allen Iverson's good. I really wanted to watch The Luckiest Guy in the World, which is about Bill Walton, who's another character of the eccentric Werner Herzog type. But that one's hard to find. I wasn't able to find that one.
Yeah, I have seen Abacus, and I actually got a chance to interview Steve James when that movie came out. And that one is good. I've seen Hoop Dreams before. I think I was the one when we were starting Awesome Movie Year. And I was like, I don't know, is this podcast thing going to work out? Do I really want to rewatch some 3-hour documentary for this podcast that we're going to give up on? And I lobbied for us to do something else. And we did. We did Crumb, which is a very worthwhile film.
Yeah, I agree.
But, now we've watched numerous movies longer than Hoop Dreams for this podcast, including in our most recent episode. So I suppose someday we'll maybe look back and do Hoop Dreams again.
Stevie is a well-known doc of his. I've never seen it, and I have not seen The Interrupters either.
Yeah, I haven't seen those, but those are also highly acclaimed. He's also done some TV series in more recent years, America to Me and City So Real, which is all about Chicago. He, like Ebert, he's a very big Chicago guy and has remained that way.
A lot of loyalty in that city.
Yeah, and that's great. So I haven't seen those. The other thing that I wanted to mention, I said we could have had more Siskel and Ebert material. Matt Singer, who's another great critic and made periodic appearances on various Ebert projects during his lifetime, he wrote a book called Opposable Thumbs that's all about the history of Siskel and Ebert that's supposed to be really good, and I'd be curious to read that.
I'm glad you brought that up because Dave and I both listened to The Big Picture on the Ringer Network, and they did a whole 8-episode series. If you go back into their archives of the history of Siskel and Ebert, that was pretty good also.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I'd love to check both of those things out. So, Dave, any further thoughts?
No, just that. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, but just everybody should go back and watch all those old clips because they're just so much fun to go back to.
They are. And
you heard it here. Dave demands you watch clips.
Yes.
I mean, it's a shame. Like, I know from trying to find these clips for various movies that we talk about, like, there's unlike the RogerEbert.com repository of all his written reviews, there is no repository of Siskel and Ebert reviews at all. It's very, very patchwork. And I assume that's in part because different eras of the show are owned by different entities and they don't want to license them. But it's a real tragedy, I think, because it's a huge part of both film history and TV history. And like a lot of talk shows, that weren't considered necessarily like worthy of preservation, this stuff just kind of got forgotten about. And it's a shame that it's so hard to find. And usually if you do find it, it's some YouTube upload by a person who randomly recorded it on VHS one time or whatever.
Yeah, I wonder if Ebert, and I don't think Siskel would have been around to review that documentary of that lady who recorded everything on TV for 30 years straight, right?
Right. And I have to think that if Ebert was around now, and I don't know if Chaz Ebert has made any efforts in this regard, but he would probably be lobbying to get something like that.
It's such a smart idea. I've told you guys this, my grandfather was on the Ed Sullivan show, and for years we couldn't find it until those archives were kind of released. And why wouldn't they do this? You can alphabetize it. You can go by year. It's so easy and worthwhile. And there's so many cross plays, cross promotional plays that you can do here. This is just get this done. Josh, take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I wish I had the resources to make it happen because it would be fantastic. So that is life itself. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can give us a thumbs up online and on social media.
And a different type on our OnlyFans. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy on all the things. Go for Jason. I might have mentioned that on Letterboxd. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, and the IG.
You can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com, including numerous blog entries about the various evolutions of the Ebert TV shows that I was very invested in at the time that they happened. I was looking up some of that stuff. I'm at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky, and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know what you think. And check out our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at PiecingPod, and check me out on Letterboxd by David Rosen.
Jason, what's in our next episode?
You.
It's me. Well, and you also, but it is my pick. I picked J.C. Chandor's film, A Most Violent Year. So tune in next time for that. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.